Theoretically, if you had the money to invest in a foreign oil industry, would you invest in Yemen? Hopefully, after this presentation, my group and I will have given you a look into the aspects that control oil in Yemen and whether or not an investment would be the right decision. The early history of Yemen is filled with great civilizations which were sought after by various powers in the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa. In 1517, the Ottoman Empire took over political power and position in modern-day Yemen. Preceding this victory, they were awarded land, natural resources, and strategically important ports along the coast of Yemen. In 1565, Yemen split into two provinces, one with Sana'a as its capital and the other with Taiz. This split proved to have disastrous consequences for the Ottoman control as it created two rival authorities. The British were the next in line looking to control the Yemen and the rest of its history. The advancement of British troops into Yemen saw the Ottoman Turks control northern Yemen, while the British controlled southern Yemen, which included the important trade routes. During this time, the beginning of World War I had just begun, spreading throughout the Arabian Peninsula, leaving the British worried about its base in Aden. With the help of Yemeni tribal fighters led by Iman Yahya, Turkish troops were defeated and North Yemen gained its independence in 1918. Due to the help of the South Yemeni leader, Iman Yahya, Britain recognized him as King of Yemen in the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920. The Iman Yahya administration was ruled with strict religious law throughout Yemen, which led to his assassination in 1948 and the succession of his son, Imam Ahmed. 2 years later, the death of Imam Ahmed in 1962 saw the takeover of the state by the military and an uprising of the Yemeni Arab Republic. Years of fighting continued as both northern royalists and southern Yemeni Arab Republic continued to dispute over political ideas. North Yemen, backed by the Soviets and Saudi Arabia, was deeply in debt from borrowing arms from the Soviets, while South Yemen were backed by Egypt. During this time, the discovery of oil began to take over the Middle East. New oil fields were discovered in Yemen, which was essential in paying back war debt both sides had compiled. The unification of North and South was essential if both sides were to come out from their current economic turmoil. In 1990, the new Republic of Yemen was signed and brought into existence by the new head of state, Ali Abdullah Saleh. Yemen's recent history has been no less worrisome. The opposition party boycotted the most recent presidential election, albeit one it would likely have lost regardless, arguing that the elections were not truly free and fair. This is not an uncommon tactic in the shakier democracies in the developing countries, and there was minimal intervention from the international community on the side of the opposition, which generally concluded that the election was relatively acceptable and was also focused elsewhere. Earlier this year, however, things in Yemen took a turn for the worst. A supposedly popular uprising occurred in the capital, ousting the sitting president in the favor of the opposition leader, who was also the last president. The rebels, who called themselves Houthis, initially had great success in their attempt to take control of the region. They pushed out from the capital, eventually taking Aden, the country's largest port, where the ousted president had set up a provisional government. The confusion and chaos of the civil war, though, is not a traditional two-sided conflict. The country's eastern regions, which have avoided much of the fighting, are being enriched upon by affiliates of both Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, reports of which brought the country back into the attention of more powerful countries. The first country to really show support for Yemen was Saudi Arabia, who shares a border with the smaller nation. The Saudis created a coalition of regional governments who were originally dedicated to only supporting the Yemeni government, mostly through airstrikes and blockades. As the war continued on, however, and the rebels continued to have success in the region, the coalition decided more drastic measures were necessary. It landed troops in and retook Aden, and began pushing the rebels back towards their base of operations in the official capital. As the coalition forces pushed north, however, they encountered harsher terrain, and the advance has ground almost to a halt, which analysts think bodes poorly for the near future of Yemen, as the war is an extremely destructive force. American airstrikes and infrastructure, supposedly to hinder rebel movements, are not helping the matter either. Now let's move on to production. Yemen's monthly average production started to decline in 2001 when it reached 4,400,000 barrels per day. This decline in production is primarily due to declining production in mature oil fields, restricted exploration, and frequent attacks on energy infrastructure. Thus, by March 2014, Yemen's oil production was estimated to decline to about 100,000 barrels per day. Declining productivity of mature fields in 2001 has become a significant problem in Yemen. This, along with Significant short-term disruptions due to attacks on energy infrastructure since 2011 have ushered a rapid decline in oil production in Yemen. Now let's take a look into sector organization. The Yemen General Oil and Gas Corporation guides a number of state-owned subsidiaries that govern the day-to-day operations of the energy sector revenues. While all of these mini subsidiaries are overseen by the Yemeni government, Yemen mostly relies on foreign companies that have production sharing agreements, PSAs, with the government to generate its revenue. Foreign companies account for most of the actual production in Yemen. Now let's take a look into exploration in Yemen. Yemen has very large concession areas in the middle and eastern parts of its lands, and the country also has a large volume of concession areas in the Aden Gulf, the Red Sea, and on Socotra Island. These concession areas throughout Yemen are currently broken up into 105 exploration blocks. Before the civil unrest erupted in September of 2014, 13 of these blocks were producing oil and were controlled by 11 companies. Another 26 blocks were in an exploratory phase operated by 14 oil companies, and 66 blocks were left open. It is also worth mentioning that Yemen is said to have 12 promising sedimentary basins, but that oil is only being produced from 2 of these 12 basins at this time. Now let's take a look into the refineries of Yemen. Oil refining is the largest contributor to the manufacturing sector's output in Yemen. The refining business generates roughly 40% of all total revenue. Yemen has 2 main oil refineries, and they are the Aden Refinery Company and the Yemen Refinery Company. The Aden Oil Refinery is the largest refinery, which was designed to produce 170,000 barrels per day in Yemen and was established in 1952 by British Petroleum. The Yemen Refining Company was established in 1986 with a production capacity of 10,000 barrels per day. After Yemen began producing crude oil in 1986, another recent area in the energy sector has been the exploration of natural gas. During the early stages of oil exploration in its oil fields, most of Yemen's natural gas has been re-injected back into oil reservoirs to boost oil returns. Therefore, much of Yemen's energy output was not maximized as compared to other natural gas-producing states. Yemen began producing natural gas in the early 1990s. However, from 1993 until 2009, when the Yemen LNG facility came online, Yemen re-injected virtually all of the natural gas produced inside the country. With the opening of the country's only LNG facility in November of 2009, Yemen began producing commercial quantities of dry natural gas for the first time in its history. In 2013, Yemen produced 365 billion cubic feet of dry natural gas, up from 28 billion cubic feet in 2009 when the production of dry natural gas began. The economy of Yemen is one of the poorest in the world. The poverty levels are extremely high and unparalleled to the United States economy. Taken from a 2010 graph of results recorded by the CIA, it is recorded that in 2010, 45.2% of the households in Yemen were living below the poverty line. From the same 2010 graph, it shows that 55% of the Yemeni population has access to health services. Although the GDP has increased to around 3,700, recorded in 2013, the GDP still ranks Yemen 141 out of 187 countries in the world. To look at it in its perspective, the United States GDP is $54,370. 75% of Yemen's economy is dominated by the oil industry. Oil production has been limited due to frequent infrastructure sabotages and horrific fuel shortages and widespread power outages, which caused a serious dent in the economy of Yemen. It was predicted in September of 2015 that the oil production will fall by 60% or 70% over the next year. However, oil production is now completely suspended. In order to try and save the economy, the Yemeni government has reduced their spending for the non-oil side of the economy. However, these changes in spending and in trade suggest 20 to 30% contraction in the next year. Due to all the issues in Yemen piling up, experts are expecting a 25 to 35% decrease in their GDP. There is hope, however, that if fighting has stopped, the economy could slowly start to rebuild, but with the political instability and violence, it does not look like the fighting will stop anytime soon. Therefore, Yemen's economy looks as if it will continue to decline. 3/4 of Yemen's total exports recently have gone to Asia. Yemen's main export partners are China, Thailand, India, the United Arab Emirates, Singapore, South Africa, and Japan. Yemen's exports have decreased in the last 10 years. 10 years earlier, they were exporting around 350,000 barrels per day of crude oil. However, in 2013, Yemen's exports of crude oil were tracked at a decreased amount of 124,000 barrels per day. Yemen also exports around 16,000 barrels per day of refined petroleum products. Aside from their petroleum exports, Yemen also exports wheat and corn, rice, meat, pharmaceutical products, sugar, and vehicles. Due to the fact that they export much of their petroleum, it is even more vital that Yemen imports enough petroleum and its products in order to have enough to meet their consumption needs. Yemen imports products such as distillate fuel oil and residual fuel oil. The amount of goods imported into Yemen has increased tremendously from 2000 to 2013. In 2000, the imports of petroleum products were around 2,000 barrels per day. However, it has grown an abundant amount to around 78,000 barrels per day in 2013. Thank you for watching our presentation on Yemen, and we hope you learned a lot about Yemen's oil industry, the history of Yemen, and the recent tolls Yemen has been taking on their economy and their oil industry by infrastructure attacks.